Hi, everyone. This is Sherry Conklin. I am a faculty member at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington. And I just want to thank everybody for taking the time and joining us in this project management and the instructional designer. This event sponsored by the Design and Development Division at AECT, the Association for Educational Communications Technology. We're really excited about this. We feel like this is a really big need. We do have the Design Development Division, the joys of working at home. So I just want to say that we do have a conference coming up in November. It's going to be virtual, where we can continue these types of conversations. I'm sorry, she's got a real big girl at work. Jill, give me a second.
I'll just take over while we're waiting for Sherry, but we are really hoping to continue these conversations with folks at our upcoming conference and in future D&D events. One of the things that's been really important, a project that we've been working on for the last several years and that Sherry has really taken the lead on this past year, is developing a task force where the Design and Development Division can really reach out to our practitioners working in a variety of different settings to really look at what are different ways that D&D can serve you and what are ways that we can learn from you as well. We really want to try and have that reciprocal communication so that our fellow researchers in the field that are members of AECT can really start targeting some of their research. Project management is so important. I think the pandemic has emphasized that in more ways than one. And so we're really excited about this webinar and hearing from our panelists in this next hour. And I'll turn it over to Sherry and we'll get started with our introductions.
Okay, so the dog is outside. Thank you, Jill. I want to go ahead and introduce our four panelists. We have Robert Branch, who is a professor of learning design and technology at the University of Georgia. Dr. Branch studies and teaches topics about designs of student-centered learning spaces, and his research focuses on diagramming complex conceptual relationships. He is a past president for the Association of Educational Communications and Technology. So welcome, Dr. Branch. We also have Dr. Williams, who is an associate professor in the Learning Design and Technology program at George Mason University. Prior to joining George Mason University, she worked for 11 years in the software development industry, where she facilitated the engineering of new e-learning technology solutions and led multiple large-scale products. She holds the PMP's credentials from the Project Management Institute and has published several articles on the relationship between project management and learning design. Her latest book, The Business Side of Learning Design and Technology, also discusses these shared skill sets of project managers and learning designers. We also have, and I'm probably going to not say your last name right, Lisa Giacumo, who is an assistant professor of organizational performance and workplace learning at Boise State University. Yay, I am an alumni from there. Her research and interests include mentoring systems and organization designed to support global and cross-cultural workplace learning needs, and the use of technology for workplace learning and performance improvement in the preparation of instructional designers. She has worked internationally as an instructional designer, trainer, and manager for businesses, universities, nonprofits, and GNOs. And we have Ms. Ginu Easow, who is a senior instructional designer at Biologics by McKesson. She has earned her master's degree in multiple disciplines, social work, curriculum instruction, and learning design technology. With more than 8 years of instructional design experience in varying contexts such as nonprofit, corporate, and academia, she has led and co-led a variety of instructional design projects across diverse contexts. So welcome everybody, and I would like to go ahead and start with Dr. Branch.
Thank you. Greetings to everyone. For those of you whom I know, hello. Those who I don't, I look forward to getting to know you. This is a real privilege. Let me know in the chat if you're having difficulty hearing me or if there's some slippage in the connection, but this is a real privilege. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to take about 5 or 6 minutes and introduce a couple of ideas because I'm looking forward to the conversation, the questions, and the answers at the end. So I'd like to spend my time backing up even from this slide for a moment. And if I may be so bold as to request permission to share a screen, what I'd like to do is to suggest to you a couple of things in just a few minutes. First, if we're talking about the importance of project management for instructional designers, as someone who's taught instructional design and project management, the first thing I would say is you definitely want to align this with the project management PMP credentials and system. But I also think there are some assumptions that we make. And the things that I say, I hope that either in the chat or in the conversation, you will say, yes, that's true, or wait a minute, there's a challenge there to these assumptions. I also want to remind us that we've been talking about this as instructional design and educational technology for quite some time. I think about Gary Gentry and his work, and I'll share that in a second, and that there are a couple of tenets, I believe, to instructional design that, that are essential. And then finally, coming up with a model or paradigm that you see SPICE that I use to teach instructional design. So Jill, Sherry, I don't know if it's possible for you to allow me to share a screen, but I want to add this notion of some assumptions. And in addition to this slide.
Give me 1 second, Rob. Yep, I'll try to.
Gotcha, it's coming, I see that. In addition to this slide, and I'll get right back to it. Sorry, by the way, Jill and Sherry said, if you have any slides, send them ahead of time. Yeah. I sent one, and of course, in preparing for this session, I definitely now want to share more. But whether we do that or not, here are the assumptions, even if I don't get to it.
I just gave you access, so you should be able to.
Thank you very much. Here are the assumptions. And this is from a paper that was written a couple of years ago. And intentional learning is complex. If we're thinking about project management, we're thinking about, hey, we're talking about instructional designers. Developing learning spaces requires project management. And instructional design is enhanced by project management. But get this, your management goals should complement your learning goals. So when we talk about learning spaces and we talk about the connection between the two, this is what I want you to see just for a second. And you'll see it again, but can you see how we're looking at processes of project management and then aligning them with the whole notion of intentional learning? When I started figuring out how to teach instructional design to how to teach project management to instructional designers, my first thought, I guess about 15, 20 years ago was, all right, let's look at ADDIE and look at the connection between the two. And I said, there's some things that you do for scoping, for planning, actualizing, closing, evaluating. Yeah. What do we call that paradigm? And that's how I came up with what you see today. It evolved into something that's called SPICE. Now, let me not go too fast. All I'm trying to say is that if you're going to teach instructional design, it's imperative that you found your ideas. If you're going to teach instructional designers how to use project management, it is imperative that you align them with the Project Management Institute ideas. And I believe one of the fundamental tenets that students who are going away with instructional design skills need to understand when it comes to project management, your project must have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Perhaps that seems rudimentary, and that's okay. But at the end of a course for instructional designers, learning how to manage a project, I submit to you that it has to be aligned with the learning space. It has to be aligned with the Project Management Institute. And they need to, the students, the designers, even if they're practicing designers, they need to be able to have a chance to practice a real project that has genuine consequences for teaching and learning. I've said quite a few things, but my introductory remarks are, I teach designers project management using this paradigm, SPICE. Every project needs a little spice. Maybe later on I'll share a story with you about how when I submitted one of these articles using SPICE, well, I'll share it now and then I'll be done. The editors of the journal rejected it because they thought I was promoting some kind of illicit drug. I didn't realize at the time that SPICE was another name for one of these exotic but illegal drugs. I contend to you that students and designers who leave with understanding the concepts will be okay. Let me say this, and then I'm done. The course that I teach, Introduction to Project Management for Instructional Designers, is intended for them to get the feel of it and not to make them experts in project management. It's important that designers fully understand the assumptions and the tenets associated with project management. Let me stop there. I'll be glad to participate down the road, but I'm looking forward to hearing the other panelists and your questions. Thank you, Sherry.
Thank you so much. And you can type in questions at any time and we'll get them to the end. I will be keeping track of all of that. Dr. Williams, we'd like to go ahead and start your presentation.
Thank you, Sherry. And I'm not going to do death by PowerPoint today. I'm just going to talk and speak from the position of someone who started out in project management in the corporate sector, then acquired learning and design skills, and then married the two together. I certainly agree with Bob's points about designers having to know project management, that every design project you're engaged in is a true project with a beginning, a middle, and an end. The only differences you'll find are your workplace settings. In educational settings, whether you're doing it in K-12 or in higher ed, you're focused primarily on getting the student learning content mastery. In industry or government, though, you're creating a learning product for either improving on-the-job performance or advancing your career. But in either setting, you've got a timeline that you have to adhere to, you have a budget that you have to adhere to, and most importantly, you have to meet the expectations of your clients, be they internal clients or external clients. So those are key. That's why most of the associations that designers belong to talk about project management. And all you've got to do is visit a job board and you'll see that even for an entry-level position, entry-level being less than 3 years of experience in the field, they're asking you to have some project management skills. So it is absolutely imperative for designers to have those project management skills. Now, what does that mean? Not so much the technical skills of knowing how to calculate schedules and do all of that thing. Project management is really people management. It's about managing the expectations of others and making sure that everybody, not only on your project team, because it is team-based, it's not a Lone Ranger type of thing, that everybody has a common or shared understanding of why you're doing the project. One of the primary reasons for project failure in the software development industry has nothing to do with processes, has nothing to do with the technical aspects of the product. It's about communication failures and no common understanding of why. The same thing applies to design projects for learning. From the very beginning, even before your project is approved, everybody needs to be on the same page as to why you are doing it. What is the benefit? What are you saving yourself? It's not only saving your organization money or finding yourself another way to make money, but learning design projects have the ultimate goal of developing and advancing your talent in your organization, which in turn helps the organization advance and helps your people stay happy. So project management is a really important piece of the learning designer's skills. You cannot thrive in the field of design, whether you're in education or whether you're in industry or government, without the basic project management skills. Like Bob, I would agree that you should align yourself with PMI, not to the depth that I, for example, had to go to become a PMP, because I started from a different area. I didn't start from L&D. I started from software engineering. But the basic outline of the PMI program, or the PMBOK as we call it, the knowledge base, is an excellent way of teaching project management skills. Now, I teach courses on project management. I had to develop them specifically for designers so they wouldn't get pulled down into the weeds the same way people in engineering or construction do. But to understand, again, that not only the processes that you need to use, and you don't have to use the full Monty, because the scope of a learning design project is probably not as large as one in software development or construction or any of those other things. But nevertheless, it requires you to be really focused on your schedule, on your money, and on delivering a quality end product. And the key to that is communication, shared understanding. So the best way to do that is to build your project management skills simultaneously with the building of your design skills. So the two of them will always be in sync and complementary and help you advance in the field. I'll pause now and we can move to the next speaker.
Thank you so much. I'd like to go ahead and introduce Lisa.
Hello, good morning, everyone, or afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Lisa Giacumo, and I have to agree with everything that Sharon said. With everything that Sharon said, while I ended up in multinational and national or corporate organizations, I actually got my start teaching children and adults in after-school or community settings. But once I made the jump to corporate workplaces, I had to learn a lot of new skill sets. And one of those skill sets was project management. So what I'm going to present today is really targeted towards those who will work in corporate or higher education context, and possibly maybe K-12 if you can find bits and pieces that make sense for your practice. Next slide, please. So I thought I should give some background just in case some people are brand new to the concept of project management. My program, when I did ID, didn't offer a course on this stuff, so I learned it on the job. But once I got to the job, I realized I actually got trained in a lot of these principles and skills during my coursework. It just wasn't necessarily specifically stated as such. So I'm going to gloss over this first part of information because you can probably find it on a lot of it on your own. And if you're curious about this, you could check out the openly and freely available ebook, Project Management for Instructional Designers. It's a great place to get started reading. And mostly I'm going to focus about what I learned through my own experience in instructional designer roles. Next slide, please. So first of all, projects are generally considered temporary. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end to projects, and they result in either a product or a service. Next slide, please. The project management, next slide, please. And do we have that? Yes, we do. Oh, sorry, back one slide. Project management uses various technologies to create improved efficiencies and effective teams, and project managers do that by creating a team that is pretty goal-focused and dedicated to the success of the project. Project team members don't always report directly to the project manager, and the success of the project might not affect their reputations or careers in the same way that other job responsibilities would. And I found this to be true of my work as an ID, especially when you're talking about working with a SME or an audio technician or a software developer. You know, I had to use a lot of influencing as opposed to any direct authority or direct reports. I just didn't have access to that kind of a organizational structure in my role. Next slide, please. So project managers apply project management tools and techniques to clearly define project goals. They plan to meet those goals. They come up with plans to meet them. They identify milestones and an end date. So success is connected directly to achieving the project goals within a project timeline and budget, as our previous speakers mentioned. So the PM has to create clear goals and expectations amongst everybody on the team to tie success to the success of the organization. So you have to think at a bigger scale than just your project in order to incentivize and motivate the people that are on your team. I wonder, does anyone think that sounds familiar? Right? That's the same thing that we have to do as IDs. So that's why it's important to get a handle on this basic information. Next slide, please. A project manager and their team may or may not be officially part of an organization. They could be external consultants or they could be internal. If they are, the project manager and team are usually direct reports to others in the organization, as I said. So the leaders of this type of a setup must use a lot of interpersonal skills, as our other speakers mentioned, and influencing to get anything done. So technologies like Monday.com or MS Teams or Trello or Smartsheets can help with your organization of your project, but you can make the best use of the technology and still not be able to achieve anything because organizational incentives, resources, and the amount of autonomy needed or human relationships and individuals' motivations will all contribute to the success or failure of a project. So then why is it helpful to learn about this stuff, right? Well, I found that I was often the project manager of projects that I was assigned to as an ID. And if I use the PM lens to communicate to my business partners, they tended to respond with better support for my work and my asks because it's grounded in common business practices, right? And if I wasn't the PM, then there was a PM and it would help to understand how things were going to play out in the project. So on the slide, you'll see some common functions that are required to stand up in a project, but I'm going to skip over that for today and go to the next slide, please. So as others that spoke before me have mentioned, you're basically going to need to develop competencies in 3 main areas. And these are going to include technical expertise, interpersonal skills, and administrative skills. And I'm not really going to read off everything on the slide. So if you want to take a screenshot, now is a good time. And I can make these slides available later. But instead, we're going to go to the next slide. And I just want to show you that the project management phases that people like to talk about are generally more or less what you see on this slide. So there's an initiation phase where there's kickoffs and you have to identify the resources that you need and probably create a high-level plan. You might come up with a vague budget during that phase, but things become clear as you go on to the planning phase. And actually, if you talk to the PMBOK people, they'll tell you that the planning phase actually goes throughout the whole project. But this is where you really start to dig into the parameters. So what is going to be part of the project, what's going to be accomplished by the end of the project, the scope, the schedule, the milestones, dates, cost estimates get a little bit more clear. You decide if you need to procure anything. Sometimes you buy something from a vendor like an off-the-shelf product. Or sometimes you hire talent or expertise and consultants to come in and do maybe a voiceover or something like that. And you think about risk management. So what could go wrong, how likely it is, and what you might do to reduce that risk. And then there's the execution phase. That's the bulk of the work. So for us, that might be a needs assessment, project activities. It might be design activities, development activities, evaluation activities, things like that. And then there's a brief closeout phase where all the reports are delivered and documents are archived. And if you're lucky, there's an after-action review, like the previous speakers have said. And if you're super lucky, you get to celebrate. So next slide, please. And what I wanted to tell you, why I wanted to tell you this, is because you're already getting trained to do at least 2 of these phases. You're getting trained to do the initiation and the execution phases for sure. And then you may also be getting trained for the planning and the closeout phases. And if you're not, you're probably going to have to do them eventually anyway. So it's good to dig into that and read up a little bit. Am I over my time? How am I doing?
You're good. You have about 4 minutes.
Awesome. Next slide, please. So here's what I thought was, this was what was unexpected for me. In the next slide, please. I didn't realize necessarily how much work I was going to have to put into making sure that I was clarifying client expectations throughout the whole project from start to finish. And these expectations can evolve, right? With new information, people make different decisions. So you have to be willing and able to constantly engage in conversations to manage these expectations, clarify the values of the client and each team member. So you need to look for the similarities and the differences, and then you need to make sure that you're getting everybody on the same page with the same values at some point somehow. That's where conflict usually arises, when people have different values. Like the SME is valuing and being incentivized to do one thing when you need them to do maybe some more things on your project, right? And so you have to figure out how to rectify that situation. You're also going to have to spend a lot of time on developing standards and procedures for dealing with problems. So eventually you'll have your own kind of rhythm on how you address those things, but whatever you do, I also learned it's important to do that as soon as possible, not to let those things rest. And people really appreciate that too, especially your managers higher up in the organization or the people that are watching you work. When they see you ready to grab the bull by the horns and just figure something out with whoever needs to be at the table, they will respect that and value that kind of leadership. You're going to have to constantly revisit past decisions because, as we said before, right, new relevant information constantly becomes available throughout the cycle of a project. And that's where I think a lot of the iteration comes in, right? Somebody asked a little bit earlier about, well, how does this allow for iteration? There's a ton of iteration in project management, and there's a lot of finessing of the schedule and the budget. New things come up that weren't anticipated, and oftentimes you can kind of work those things in by making concessions in other areas or making different paths forward than what you had originally planned. You're going to have to spend a lot of time negotiating and resolving conflicts, but hopefully most of your time is really spent on developing trust with others by continuously clarifying goals for everyone, managing your meetings, and monitoring and reporting progress to everybody. People like to know that what they're doing is making a difference and well received. And you're going to have to be the leader for that strong shared vision. So constantly communicate why we're doing this, what it's going to help the organization achieve, and how important their work is on that team. Next slide, please. And so looking back, my advice, based on my own experience anyways, and so you'll have to take that with my context and a grain of salt. I really think you're going to get the technical ID, change management, evaluation, needs assessment, learning experience, user experience, authoring tool knowledge that you need from your university coursework or webinars or training courses and conferences. You'll need to learn more as you go, but you'll have enough to get you started on the job, either before you graduate or immediately upon graduation. But then from practicums, internships, and even course project work, you will learn to develop some administrative skills too. So you're going to watch how your instructors organize the projects, what they ask you to do, when they ask you to do it, how they ask you to do it, and report out. You're also going to grow these skills when you start to take on small contracts or even full-time employment. You'll watch how the organization typically handles the project, organization of templates, documents, timelines, just general information management, and soon you'll have your own hybridized preferences and approaches for administrative needs and practices. And you may get experience actually developing some of the interpersonal skills, but I think this is where you're going to have to probably focus the most effort. At least I did anyways. especially if you are able to work in virtual teams during your master's program or in training development situations, or complete group projects in your coursework. Those are pretty similar because no one officially reports to you in those group projects or those virtual team projects, but you may have to work with a real client. However, I think you'll probably need to seek out more opportunities in this category out of any of the three categories to develop many different types of relationships with other people to improve your interpersonal skills. And some of these will come from being in graduate school, but most of it will come from talking with mentors, supervisors, coworkers, network with colleagues, and seeking out new communication approaches and tactics. So anytime you run into like a challenge with another person or how to broach a conversation, a difficult conversation, or get something done that's not started or that's stalled out, that is an opportunity to seek out advice, to seek out stories from others who work through similar situations, and try some new language, some new communication approaches, maybe some new management, sales even, or negotiation strategies out. So that's all I have for today. Next slide, please. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lisa. We'd like to go ahead and Ginu.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. So it's a tough act to follow after so many experts speaking about project management. And if I can surmise or summarize everything that they've said in one word, it would be, ditto. All I can say is that I can share my experiences with you. And like Sherry introduced me, I've worked across, nonprofit, corporate, and as well as academic settings. And as Dr. Williams said earlier, across the context, one thing that I found that was same was processes. And in some cases, it was towards the common goal of developing a product. But what was unique to each of these contexts was the people, the environment, the nuances. The processes are the same, irrespective of what framework you apply. But it's the stakeholders, their expectations. And one thing I have learned is that it comes gradually. Your education will prepare you with the foundational pieces, like Lisa put it so well, right? All of those technical pieces, the software that you need to use, the tools, and in today's times, there are plenty of tools out there. And each context or each environment would use a separate tool. So for example, when I was in academia, we used something called a planner within the Microsoft Office suite to plan our projects and keep on top of it. But now when I shifted to a corporate setup, we use something called ClickUp. I've used Trello before. There are so many out there. So more than the tool, if it is one thing that you need to hone on, it's the interpersonal skills. And that doesn't happen overnight. It takes time. And with every project that you do, you learn something new. With every diverse context that you work in, you learn something new. So Lisa said something about, reaching out, talking to your mentors, networking with your peers. If I can add one new element to that, it would be to try and do some volunteer design and development work across these different contexts, which will give you an insight and idea into how these different environments work and react to the process, the project management process itself. So if I had to share with you, I would say keep in mind the 3 Ps: the people, the product, the process, when you think about project management and instructional design. And then one of the bullet points that Jill had asked us to think about is, what if instructional designers want to get into managerial roles? When you think about instructional designer per se, you know, it's almost like jack of all, master of none. You have to have a little bit of knowledge and experience in every aspect, some of the things that we previously mentioned, which is be it technical, be it administrative, interpersonal, and those same aspects can be applied to someone who's interested in a leadership role, a managerial role, right? It's more than managing people, it's knowing the why. If everybody who is working on that project takes ownership of the why we are in this project together and works towards it, that same principle can be applied to anybody who's interested in a leadership role, because you're leading a team. And in today's day and time, you don't need to manage them. You just need to facilitate that process of being able to render or get the good, you know, get the best work from your team. So it's facilitating the process, and project manager in a nutshell is that. Applying all of these different skill sets to make sure you reach the end goal together, not to leave out your people in the process, because they are key to the project as well. So I'll stop there. And like Dr. Brandt said, I am looking forward to questions from everybody and have a very effective and fruitful conversation about project management.
Thank you so much, Ginu, and thank you to the entire panel. So we do have a couple questions that are, and we have some more that are coming in, but for the panel, does SPICE or other PM approaches allow for iterative, recursive design processes? And we can, if you want to answer in the same order that you presented.
I'll just mention it. I'll just start only because I mentioned SPICE. And again, that's just one conceptual framework to think about it. But the answer is yes. However, let me be very clear. It's iterative, but it's layered. So while there's some overlap in the approaches, at some point we do stop the different phases. At least that's what you ought to have planned. They may slip, they may slide, and be careful when you do that. But it's iterative if you are talking about being able to revisit parts of the process while you are making progress.
Does anybody else want to chime in?
Okay, I won't comment on SPICE specifically, but I will talk about being iterative. Both project management processes as well as design processes are iterative. I'm sure everyone's heard of agile design and agile project management, which breaks things up into little segments and lets you take advantage of being iterative. So the old beginning to end and then figure out how it works, that's gone. Even in very large, expensive, multi-year projects, you break them up so that you can visit each part iteratively. So absolutely, both project management and learning design are iterative processes, and the two should be going on simultaneously.
Lisa, did you want to chime in?
I'm sorry, I was chatting about, somebody asked a question about volunteer IDs, so I was finding a link for that. What was the question? I missed it, I'm sorry.
It's just does SPICE and other PM approaches allow for that iterative recursive design process?
Oh, absolutely. Like I was showing in the slide about what the PM phases are. There's the execution phase. That phase of PM includes your whole project, right? So for whether it's needs assessment or it's design or you're doing development or maybe you're doing some evaluation, there's that whole box where you can iterate inside of there all day long, right? Till you're done. And I found when I worked as an ID that, you know, we would draft up objectives at the start of a project, but we would revisit them throughout the project. And sometimes we were tweaking them, you know, the day before we sent it back to the client, wordsmithing the last little bit. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for that iterative recursive design approach inside of any project. And you'll see that in the software industry too, right? They'll come up with this idea that they want all these features, and then they start into the project and they get some features done, and then they realize they don't need the other feature, they need that feature, and they put in a new feature, right? So it's pretty normal to modify your plans as you move through the cycles of a project until the delivery date, in my experience anyways.
And I want to add to that, because both what Sharon and Lisa said, yes, revisiting is important. However, please, I would encourage project managers, instructional designers, if you make a change, client says, hey, this is fantastic. In fact, most of the time, changes are requested because your team is doing a fantastic job. Your templates, your models, your ideas, what you've presented are so well, you often hear, this is great. Can we add this? Pause. Philosophical point of view. My answer is always, sure, we can do that. But you know what's coming next? What's coming next has to be, we can make those changes. I'll get back to you with the revisions in the time, the cost, and these expectations for you to approve before we go forward. So yes, it's iterative, but it's iterative with some conditions as you continue to manage the expectations of the stakeholders, especially the client. That's one position. Again, you, the panel, or others may have different positions, but that tends to be successful and helpful.
No, Bob is absolutely right on that. A successful project manager, as part of the project from the very beginning, sets up a change management plan. So the process and the criteria for implementing changes is clear. Otherwise, some client's bright idea that he or she thought up at a cocktail party suddenly becomes part of the project, and you don't want that. So figuring out up front, before you put pen to paper, how you're going to manage changes, requested changes, and how to assess whether or not those changes will add value to your end product rather than just glitz and glamour. That's part of being a project manager.
Absolutely, I would agree. And in my experience, it's been just that. If I can go ahead and share one of my really difficult projects to give you an idea of how that worked out in terms of change management. It was a seasonal or an annual training that we designed around healthcare insurance. And we had the project plan in place, the stakeholders signed off on it, everything good to go. We designed and developed the instructor-led training, all fantastic. And then we send it for approval to our executive director, and there, as the project sponsor, a barrage of changes is requested, which ends up tweaking the slide deck and increasing it all the way to 256 slides. Now, when you look at it from a content perspective, it's definitely content overload for the end user, right? So we ended up delivering the deck, but what we did was the change management, not in terms of change management, but we collected data in terms of the training. And the data we got, we used that as an evidence to go back and negotiate and have a conversation about how the training can be tweaked when we do the training next time around. And so in a nutshell, documentation, plans, and all of that is absolutely critical in talking to your stakeholders and convincing them when it comes to design and development, be it training or any project for that matter. So just sharing my experience on that aspect.
Thank you so much. I'm going to combine a couple questions here. So people are asking how necessary the PMP certification is, particularly for ISDs. And Justin, I believe it was Justin, said, you know, they are looking at the CAPM, the Certified Associate. So how necessary is this for IDs? And then when you are managing a project, and you discover that the benefits don't support the progression of a project. How do you approach this topic with the stakeholders?
Sherry, can I go at it first? The reason I said that is, or I asked was, so as a ID, I don't have a PMP certification. How critical is that to project management in the environment you are in? I would say not as much, but if you are willing, having said that, I am enrolled in the CAPM course right now. And the reason I'm enrolled is here. If down the line in the future, I do want to take on a full-fledged project management role and also get into the role of being an external consultant or an external project manager, that becomes extremely crucial. However, if you're a full-time employee, an instructional designer in a certain environment, it may not be as critical unless the environment has a dedicated project management team and you are being hired by that team.
I'll pile on to what Ginu said for the first question about, is the PMP necessary? I've been a PMP for 13 years, so I've seen it on all sides. Again, it's dependent on the organization and the industry segment in which you are working. In education, if you're planning to stay in education in K to 16, for example, it's not as critical. However, if you are working for an organization that provides instructional products to others, so for example, in the learning and development divisions of the big companies like Deloitte and Booz Allen, or companies like Management Concepts, they prefer you to have PMPs because you're dealing with big projects. However, they also pay for you to learn how to become a PMP. So that's the benefit there. So when you're starting out in the field, it is not at all essential, because what's really essential is not only to refine your experience as a designer, but also to figure out what industry you want to work in over time, because that's really the definitive factor. And the second question, could you repeat that again, Sherry? What was the second half of that question?
So if you are on a project and you discover the benefits don't support the progression of that project, how do you approach that topic?
Yeah, it's what we used to call and still call the kill decision. When do you terminate a project? A good project manager, of course, should be monitoring not only the progress of the project from the beginning, but also what's going on in the world around them. In some industries that are highly regulated, we've got healthcare folks here, that's a regulated industry. Or if you're in the government sector where OPM can suddenly come up with something entirely different, that change alone can kill a project because it was geared to a whole different set of circumstances. So if it's an external factor that tells you the benefits are no longer are good for the organization, it's much easier, although it's never easy, but easier to go back to the sponsors and stakeholders and say, look, the world has changed, we can't do this anymore. It's less easy if it's an internal issue, particularly for functional management, functional departments, not the project team, but areas outside of the project team. That makes it a lot more difficult. And really what talks for you is money, the budget, to see what you've spent, what you're gonna spend, what you think the value of that project is. And you come to your sponsor and the stakeholders and say, look, we're gonna go red. Before we go any deeper, let's halt. That's one of the toughest conversations to have. But yes, the project manager has to be prepared to have that sooner rather than later.
Would anybody else like to chime in? Good. There was another question here. You know, we've been talking about the Project Management Institute, the PMP, the CAMP. it makes this person, and I'm sorry, I don't have the person's name here, to what extent project management and perhaps instructional design is a Western concept? And how do these principles and methods translate to other cultures?
Can I start with that? One of the things I have in my book on the chapter on project management has to do with the origins of project management. And the first documented instances we have of project management as we know it today come from ancient Egypt. The first project managers were the ones responsible for getting the pyramids built. We also have documentation about project management processes as we know and use them today from ancient Mesopotamia. So guys, project management is not a Western concept. If anything, it comes from outside of the West and has been adapted to Western thinking and Western ways of doing things. As for design, I'll let Bob or one of the others address that, but no, project management is not a Western concept. And I think colleagues from other continents who are members of PMI or of PRINCE, which is the EU version of it, would disagree that it's a Western concept.
Let me very quickly say, absolutely yes. When I teach project management to designers, the very first introduction, Sharon, I actually talk about how it is an Egyptian concept. That's the first thing in my notes.
Anybody else want to chime in? I think so AECT is very focused on instructional designers and practitioners, and that is a good organization. I am not a part of ADT, but one of our panel participants said, you know, I would be interested in learning about benefits of joining a professional development organization such as ADT, and I'm going to put AECT there as well. Because both seem to be specific to IDs. And are any of you involved with these types of organizations? Of course, Rob, you were the past president of AECT. And does networking benefit beginners? And if anybody's part of ADT, I think we've got some new people here, so it might help to say, you know, which organizations benefit IDs in what ways.
I can take a stab at it. I used to be a member of the Chicagoland chapter for ATD. And then I've also been a member of Quality Matters, which happens to, so I've been members of different professional organizations. And when it comes to project management and instructional design, I would say being part of any of these professional organizations is a great way to network and learn from your peers. What are the industry standards? What are the expectations? And sometimes those ideas and those interactions inform you, and you are able to take it back to your own organizations, irrespective of where you're working, right? And apply it and try something new. So is it beneficial to the growth of your career as an ISD? I would say yes, because it informs you about the latest trends and the latest practices. But along with that, I would also say be aware of the time that it takes on your end to be able to participate in these professional organization related activities, or to be able to contribute to them, because unless you're part of it, unless you participate and contribute to it, you cannot get out of it as much. So you can take out of it or get out of it as much as you put in. And I will leave it at that.
Yeah. I would like to just point out that if you're finding this webinar of value, you're already starting to network and become involved, right? Because we represent AECT, and some of us are also members of ATD. I'm a member of the national chapter as well, or the national org, as well as the local chapter here in the Treasure Valley. And absolutely, the reason that my career has taken the path it has is because of my involvement in these different organizations. I was able to build relationships with individuals and ask questions and get guidance, and you just have sounding boards around me and friendly faces that were interested in developing my career as much as I was. Inside an organization, that's not always the case, but when you get together in these professional societies, everybody's there to support each other. That is their goal. That is the mission of the organization.
I concur with Lisa's comments about building your network. And my advice would be to get involved, if you can, with more than one organization, because each organization has its own flavor, its own target audience, its own emphasis. And when you're just starting out, you may not know exactly where you want to go and where you want to be. So you need to at least get exposure to as much as possible. Even after you have a lot of experience, stay involved in multiple organizations. I'm involved in leadership in 4 different professional associations, including PMI at the national level, not to mention the Academy of Management, where you would think only business people go, but design cuts across all industries and across all disciplines. You need to have a foot everywhere until you make the decision, yes, I want to do this only, or I want to do that only. So expose yourself to as many as possible.
Well, I think that really concludes all of our questions, and we're right on time. And I really appreciate our panelists today. If everybody can go ahead and give a hand. Here we go. And there we go. Thank you all so much. We really appreciate it. We will be sharing the documents and the slides. Is that okay, panelists, that were shared?
You can also share my email address if anyone wants to contact me.
Okay, great.
Sure.
Along with the recording. So thank you so much, and we appreciate your time. I think this was very useful and helpful for a lot of people.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.